Good afternoon and welcome to Round the Table Live with Christian Cern. I'm Tim Dieppe, and today we are talking about and with the school chaplain who is now suing his school and head teacher for malicious referrals, having previously been sacked from his job for preaching a Christian sermon in a Christian act of worship in a Christian school chapel, acting as school chaplain. And I'm delighted that we have got Reverend Dr. Bernard Randall on the line with us today. Thank you very much for joining us, Bernard. Very good to see you.
My pleasure. Good afternoon.
And we've also got our Christian Cern's Head of Education, Steve Beegoo, as well, joining us here for the conversation. Hi, Steve.
Good to see you, Tim. Good to see you, Bernard.
Thanks for joining us. Now, Bernard, your story is really quite remarkable. It's gone all over the place. It's got a huge profile. People are shocked. Even I think this week I've seen people say, I don't believe that this could really have happened on social media. But Bernard, it has happened. Tell us, remind us what actually happened to you that caused you to lose your job as a school chaplain in a Christian Church of England school.
Yeah, well, I mean, how long have we got, really, is the question, because it's a big story. I mean, there's so much of it, so many aspects to it. But I was a chaplain in the school with a Protestant Evangelical Church of England foundation. And the school introduced a very aggressively pro-LGBT agenda, which I raised some concerns about, but those were brushed off. And during the course of the year, people said to me, could you give a sermon in chapel, sir, on how come we're told we have to accept all this LGBT stuff in a Christian school, which I thought was really good.
I just want to pause because you are going fast here, but it always is worth reminding people that the school welcomed into the school this group called Educate and Celebrate, which promotes transgenderism. And in a staff training session, actually, you witnessed them asking the staff to chant "smash heteronormativity."
That's right, and heteronormativity is basically the notion that society is based on male and female couples forming families. They want to smash that. In fairness, I suspect many of the school staff involved didn't realise what they were getting themselves in for, but certain activist people within the senior leadership, I think, were responsible for bringing in a group. And not necessarily telling the other leadership this is what they're about. Anyway, that's my hypothesis. I can't prove that. Right. So we had this group, and it was pushing these ideas. And so I delivered a sermon in June 2019, which I basically said, you make up your own mind. You don't have to accept the ideologies. So there should be no discrimination against people. God loves everybody equally.
And your sermon, which landed you in all this trouble, is available online, isn't it?
It's online on the Christian Concern website. It was published on
I
Sunday.
hope my colleagues can just ping it up there in the comments. By the way, if you're watching live on Facebook and YouTube, we can see your comments. You've got questions for Steve or for Bernard, ping them along and we'll try and get to them. But yes, your sermon, you can go and read it and see exactly what he said that was deemed so offensive. But I've read it myself. And here we go. We put it up on there. Christian.com/resource/school sermon by Bernard Randall, competing ideologies, hyphens between all those words. But you really do just say you should be free to disagree with this, don't you?
That's the fundamental thing. You're free to disagree, but respect the people you disagree with. And I said that about 6 times. Because loving your neighbor doesn't mean you have to agree. It just means you respect somebody's sincerity if they do disagree. But I used the examples of disagreements between many or most Christians and some LGBT activists. So it's quite a sort of broad terms sense. But I said, you may believe that marriage is properly only a man and a woman, and that as an ideal, sex belongs within such a marriage. You may believe biological sex is real and can't be changed. Sometimes makes a difference. You may look at the language of gender identity and think, well, it's incoherent, it doesn't make sense, and therefore it can't be more than partly true. But I emphasized repeatedly, respect the people you have these discussions with, respect the disagreement, but make up your own mind. And if you agree with LGBT stuff, that's absolutely fine too. I explicitly said that. Which is, in a school chapel, a Christian school, I probably should have been able to be much firmer about things.
Well, yes.
I wanted to respect people's rights to actually think for themselves. Sadly, it turns out the school were not so keen on people thinking for themselves on these topics. So I was initially suspended. I was reported to prevent the government's anti-terrorism.
It's indoctrination, not education now, isn't it, Bernard?
Sadly, it looks that way. In a
old education used to be teaching people how to think and what to think and how to assess for themselves, and now it's like teaching you what to think.
Yeah, indeed. So it's about having an open mind. Was what I was saying. Think about it. Yeah. That was not acceptable. So I was reported as a potential terrorist to prevent. I was reported to the.
Wait a minute. First of all, you lost your job, didn't you? I mean, that happened first.
Well, no, I was reported before I lost my job. Actually, that's the.
Oh, right.
So I was reported in.
They reported you to prevent as a terrorism potential risk, whatever. Before
that was
saying
during the disciplinary process that happened, and they also reported me to the local authority designated officer for safeguarding.
Wow.
As a risk to children.
Thankfully, risk to children for saying you should make up your own minds.
Yes, on these topics. Yeah. So thankfully, the prevent police team said there's nothing to see here, and also the safeguarding officer also said there's nothing to see here. And if you read the sermon, you can see why. But the school decided to sack me for gross misconduct.
Gross misconduct of what? What was the gross misconduct?
Well, partly it was I was apparently supposed to guide people spiritually without making them think hard. It was supposed to be a safe space.
Your gross misconduct was making people think.
It kind of comes down to that. Yeah, I mean that's not exactly how the school put it. But I didn't show enough respect.
I can't help laughing at this. It's so ridiculous.
I didn't show enough respect for the protected characteristics. I was allegedly
even though you said respect lots and lots of times.
Yeah, indeed. I was allegedly forcing a particular archaic viewpoint on pupils, despite me saying make up your own mind repeatedly. And there was a danger I was going to bring the school into disrepute. So for suggesting Christian teachings in a Christian school were acceptable.
I think the schools brought themselves into disrepute by their treatment of you, Bernard, but there we are.
Well, you might think that I couldn't possibly comment, I'm sure.
Or something, having brought themselves into disrepute for their treatment of you.
Yes. So I appealed against the dismissal, and actually I was reinstated by the governors. I think they realised that the dismissal was a little excessive, but they did give me a list of 20 conditions that I had to abide by, including all my sermons being censored in advance by a member of the senior leadership team who was not a Christian. And I wasn't allowed to mention anywhere in the school anything that might cause offence or upset to anybody, which is pretty restrictive, I would say.
That means you can't say Christianity is true.
Exactly. So I was, and if I'd failed to meet these 20 conditions, I was at risk of immediate summary dismissal. So I wasn't able to do my job properly. But then the COVID thing came along, and they decided to furlough me because they hadn't given me my teaching timetable back. Furloughed me on the basis that they didn't need spiritual care during the most severe crisis the country has faced since the Second World War, or something like that. That's up to them. And then eventually at the end of 2020, they made me redundant because they decided they could do without a chaplain in this Christian school. And my contention is that was simply they wanted to get rid of me because my ideas were not acceptable to them. The school leadership being rather more secular than the school's founding document would suggest they should be.
So Steve, you wanted to chip in here.
Well, yes, I just think it's worth highlighting what normally happens in school, having been a head teacher myself. The reporting to prevent, what would normally happen for those that are watching this and viewers, that happens when somebody's concerned that the level of extremism might lead to terrorism. That's the kind of reason why you would report somebody to prevent. So the school has decided on the basis of this sermon to report to the anti-terrorism Let's Stop Extremism organization. So this is what you can I hope people could understand why it could be being seen as malicious to do this. You would assume that the school, the leadership of the school, have got some level of intelligence, knowing what they're doing, why they're doing it.
And Steve, just give us also some perspective. What would normally count as gross misconduct for like immediate dismissal?
Well, I mean, the kind of things. If there was some genuine terrorism, I think that would be misconduct. Significant safeguarding issues, which is so they reported Bernard to the LADO, the local authority designated officer, because they were suggesting that he could be abusing children by the things that he was doing, causing significant harm to children because of the kind of sermon that he delivered. Those kinds of things, if you were doing something of considerable concern related to the abuse of children, of course, that would be given as gross misconduct. But then I believe Bernard was also reported to the Teaching Regulation Authority, which is the organisation that would bar people from working in schools, bar teachers, because they've carried out some kind of behaviour that is so abhorrent that you should never be allowed to be in front of children ever again. And it's this kind of continued referrals that Bernard is now bringing this case about the school to, about the head teacher, because the nature of these referrals seems to be actually misconduct rather than anything that he has done.
Yes, I mean it's worth saying that the more recent referrals are later on in the story. So the Teaching Regulation Authority and the Disclosure and Barring Service, those are the most recent sort of thing that's been in the news, because having been dismissed by redundancy artificially, I would maintain, at the end of 2020, I had a claim against the school for discrimination, because it seemed the way they had treated me was clearly because of my religious beliefs and actually a reasonable expression of them in a sermon in chapel.
Yeah.
But we had that case that was heard in September 22, and then in February this year we got the result, and we lost, much to the surprise of pretty much everybody who'd been following it. I suspect much to the surprise of the school's own lawyer, because I think he got the sense that he was not on a good wicket, as it were. Anyway, and on the back of that judgment, which you can read it, it's like 76 pages long or something, so there's a lot of it, and a lot is in legalese. But various things like claiming that I had abused my position of trust to put these beliefs across, and that it was inappropriate to use persuasive language about these beliefs, because saying you may believe that marriage is probably only a man and a woman was too persuasive and inappropriate. I mean, that's the level of
it's really shocking
lack of friendliness to religion, shall I say, from the judge. So that is under appeal, and we're confident of winning that in due course.
When do you expect that appeal to be heard, Bernard? Do you have a date?
Well, that will be, we've got a preliminary hearing in February, and at some points towards the back of next year, probably. Right. But we just don't know at this stage. So it drags on. Yeah. But the higher up the court system you go, the more sensible the judges are. So we'll get there in the end.
And I can see here a question, Bernard, from Alexandra Teng on YouTube. How did students react to the head teacher's decision to dismiss and report you? Do you know? Presumably you haven't been into the school.
Well, I in terms of the reports, the students wouldn't have known until after I left the school. Yeah. Those few pupils that I've had contact with have been shocked and outraged, and a few parents as well.
Right.
Have been, very supportive of me and can't quite believe what the school did.
Yeah.
And that's reassuring. Obviously, the sad thing is that they are left without decent chaplaincy. And so it's
any chaplaincy.
Well, they still have chapel services apparently, but
Right.
they just have random members of staff or heads of year or whatever delivering chapel services. And you can imagine how bland and anodyne those are going to be. Apparently,
I can imagine how bland and anodyne. Yes,
there was one chapel service. I'm told. Yes. I don't know exactly the details, but I'm told that the Bible was used to prove that you shouldn't vape.
Right.
I don't remember that verse, but never mind.
No. Yeah.
So and when I when I was reinstated by the governors, I'd been out of school for 6 weeks or so at the start of the school year. And on my first day back, a couple of 15-year-old lads, I think they were, came to me and said, really glad to have you back, sir. Chapel services are going to be interesting again now.
Well, yes.
and they were not Christians in any sense. They were just, that was lovely of them. But
rather have something interesting than bland and boring. Yeah, of course.
Young people want something to get their teeth into. They want to think about stuff, whether they agree or disagree, and they might violently disagree.
Yeah,
but being challenged to think about that is good for them.
So Bernard, tell us about. So you've been referred initially to Prevent, then to the local safeguarding officer, then to the Church of England's safeguarding officer.
That's right.
Is that right? Then to the
right. and rather bizarrely, the secular safeguarding officer took no notice. Just clearly was not interested that there was anything there that was his remit, not of concern.
No, nothing to see here. Yeah.
The Church of England's safeguarding team decided that teaching the Church of England's own teaching, or at least suggesting the Church of England's teaching may be held, I wasn't even really teaching it, that was a safeguarding concern. So the secular authority said, church teaching, fine, no problem. The church said, church teaching, this is a real concern to me. It might be harmful.
That's completely.
I remain under investigation or under a safeguarding process with the Church of England. So there's a whole extra set of legal goings on.
What do you think happened there? This is presumably LGBT activists in the Church of England who are making this claim.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to say. One of the things that happens with the safeguarding advisors in diocese is that they are employed for safeguarding. They're not employed as Christians specifically. So
Right.
they will bring in safeguarding.
So maybe a non-Christian employee of the Church of England.
So they'll bring in safeguarding experts from wherever, regardless of any faith commitment. And you can understand why that would be the case, because you need people who know about safeguarding.
Yeah.
So they are former social workers, former police officers very often.
Right.
So they've got some experience in that area, but their background and their training leans towards the sort of woke, the pro-LGBT, that kind of agenda.
Yeah.
And it's hardly surprising if they bring that into their work. And they should be separating their personal views from their professional job.
But it is surprising if they bring it into their work to the extent that they say Church of England teaching is actually a safeguarding risk. I mean, that is surprising.
That appears to be what they're saying. They've at no stage have they been able to give me a properly justified explanation of why I might be a safeguarding concern. All that there is I'm willing to stand up and say this is the Church of England's teaching on marriage and sexuality.
Yes.
And from that they make a whole sequence of jumps to he might cause untold harm to someone who came to talk to me about sexuality if they were struggling. I'm not quite sure what harm you can do to that person really. No. Just in a conversation, but they seem to think unless I give the right answers according to them, if I don't deal with it appropriately, that would be abuse, which is not most people's definition of abuse.
And presumably Prevent deciding you're not a terrorist.
Yeah.
The local authority safeguarding people said you're not a safeguarding risk.
That's right.
Church of England said you were. Now, yes. And then more recently you've had the Teaching Regulation Agency, which has finally decided you're not worth barring from teaching forever and ever.
That's right. So the Teaching Regulation Authority got the referral from the head, and within a few weeks they'd written to me and said these are our concerns. These are the sort of a charge sheet, if you like.
Yeah.
Alleging that if I had done these things, it was unprofessional conduct and contrary to the fundamental British values, and that's the kind of thing that will get you struck off from teaching. And amongst the things that they said I had said, a number of things that I just hadn't said at all, or were garbled versions of what I had said. But amongst the things were it was misconduct to suggest to pupils that the ideologies and views of LGBT plus activists are adverse to Christian belief, is misconduct to tell pupils, well, LGBT activists and Christians disagree about some stuff.
What?
Which they clearly do. Okay, there are some Christians who are pro-LGBT.
Misconduct to state a fact.
So, exactly.
I mean, what?
And it was also misconduct, according to them, to say, or to suggest that they did not have to accept the views or ideologies of LGBT plus activists.
That's ridiculous. That's so intolerant, isn't it? You
So,
have
well,
to.
and
Even
it's
suggest you don't have to, accept this stuff.
it's subverting the law, because the law is
Yeah.
very clear that teachers have a duty of political impartiality.
Yes.
Yes.
So on something like, for example, is gender identity something that we should put into law, which at the moment it isn't in law, and LGBT activists want it to be part of the law, and they're allowed to campaign for that. That's fine. I don't mind. I disagree strongly with their views, but they're allowed to do that. But in schools, teachers must be impartial on that.
Yes.
So what I was being told was it was misconduct unless I broke the law. So if I broke the law and said you must agree with LGBT activists, that would be fine. But if I followed the law and said you make up your own mind, there are balancing views, that would be misconduct. And part of the problem, of course, is if a teacher is not impartial in a school, who do you report them to? The Teaching Regulation Agency. So the capture by the sort of progressive, woke, cultural Marxist, whatever you want to call this movement, the capture of things like the Teaching Regulation Agency, it is alarming. We know that there are problems with this in our schools, but when the regulator of the schools
That's right.
is taking this kind of viewpoint, that's really worrying. So what happened was I made a fairly robust response saying, actually, as a teacher, it's my duty to say you make up your own mind. It's my duty to give facts. And actually, I'm modelling fundamental British values of democracy and individual liberty by being willing to say, here are some challenging ideas. Because if we say to our young people, you must never speak about this topic, you're effectively saying there's no individual liberty on this. There's no democratic right of free expression on this.
You must think this, you must say that, you can't express any discrimination.
Teachers need to not only say you have free speech, which is a fundamental British value, they need to show, they need to model it. It's not enough just to say, it's, you have it, you must do it. So I gave a strong response, and then took them a few months to work it out. But in September, they wrote saying that if it had been proved that I had said what they thought I'd said, if these allegations were proved, it would be misconduct. So they didn't back away from their claim that it's misconduct not to support LGBT ideology.
Wow.
But they took into account that I was speaking as a Christian in a sermon, and it had all been dealt with at a local level. So they didn't think it would be worth putting me in front of a tribunal to have me struck off as a teacher, which is a bit bizarre, because if it's dealt with at a local level, that means a teacher is sacked or has misconduct against them by the school, which should mean that no teacher who is sacked from a school for doing something wrong should then ever be struck off, because it's been dealt with at a local level.
Well, and the logic is completely flawed.
The logic is nonsense. I just think they didn't fancy having that argument in a public tribunal, which is what it would be, because I would be standing up for free speech and human rights and fundamental British values, and they would have to be opposing human rights.
Yes.
And I don't think they fancied that. Surprise, surprise.
No. So, Steve, Bernard is actually not the only Christian to have been referred to some of these agencies because of his Christian faith or expression of Christian faith. Do you think this is a new trend that we're starting to see here in teaching?
Well, certainly at Christian Concern, we are hearing more and more of situations like this. We've got a case of Hannah. I encourage people to go to our Christian Concern website and have a look at our cases. Hannah is not her real name, because we have to hide her name because of the processes that are going on. She also has been through something very, very similar to Bernard, where she was standing against the transgender ideology that was being encouraged and affirmed related to a particular situation with a pupil. there in the school. And we have
she was raising safeguarding concerns about an 8-year-old being allowed to socially transition, wasn't she? That was what she did.
That's it. Absolutely. As any caring teacher should do if they believe a child is actually being harmed by some of the processes that they're being involved in, and that the school may be being complicit in that. Of course, the teacher should raise their justifiable concerns about that. But she's been hounded. She's been even chased for costs with the things that she's been raising, and it is an alarming trend that this is a way in which school leadership, multi-academy trust leadership, even the Church of England seem to think what they should do is to refer these things onto others. Because again, once you get into these systems, these things take years to work their way through. And so by doing this referral process, it punishes Christians who are raising these issues and who are facing and raising their voice about these issues that is actually harming children.
And I think we've had 1 or 2 other teachers reported to Prevent for expressing Christian views. And I think Joshua Sutcliffe as well was reported to the Teaching Regulation Authority for alleged misgendering. And the Teaching Regulation Authority did discipline him and did say he should be barred from teaching, which I think we're looking to challenge there. But how is it, Steve, though, as well? Here you have, on the one hand, educate and celebrate, that, by the way, misrepresented the law on protected characteristics. Bernard didn't say that, but they did. And also, do stupid things like saying smash heteronormativity. And obviously want to, there's no sort of tolerance for opposing views with them. And they're welcomed into the school and not treated as safeguarding risk and not treated as being, politically biased or anything. And then there's Bernard, who says you should be free to disagree. How is this possible that it's so upside down and back to front and all the way around? Yeah,
it's crazy, isn't it? How is it possible? It's basically a radical extremist way of thinking that is now being propagated in our nation and even in our schools. It's an ideology. It's a way of thinking about life, and it particularly is focused. If you go down to its roots, it's focused on who people believe they are, who you are as a person, who you understand yourself to be as a person, and therefore particularly how you should behave sexually, because in this new way of thinking, this new way of understanding, being a sexual being is it's like the paramount, most important thing about who you are as a person. And what they would say, what this new way of thinking is separated from science or the Bible or common ways in which in our nation, in Western society, we've come to understand things about who you are and who you are as a person. This new way has come in, has infiltrated, and is really pushing back against those seemingly old ways with these new progressive ways. And what it says is the only way you can really know who you are, there's only one way you can really know who you are, and that is to find that out from inside yourself, to find that out from inside your own feelings. That's the only thing you can trust in terms of knowing who you are as a person. So those feelings of love or gender or the feelings about sex, that's the only solid thing you can trust in. You can't trust in the Bible. You can't trust in a God, because God doesn't even exist, does he? You can't trust in these things. Even science, you can't trust in the doctors who assigned you a sex when you were born just on the basis of having a look at the organs that you had on your body. No, you can't trust those things. The only thing you can really truly trust is your own feelings about yourself, and the only way you can flourish as a person is by expressing those inner thoughts and feelings that you might have. So it kicks against science, it kicks against free speech, it kicks against genuine diversity, because this is the only way you can understand who you are as a person, and therefore the only way you can flourish is to express all of these things. And anybody that says anything different is trying to oppress you, is trying to harm you. And as one of our commentators says, it would say on here as well, then that's abuse. You must push back against these oppressive powers of Christianity and even science that have pushed against you understanding who you are, and so that we can be free and flourishing individuals in our new transgender identity, in our sexual identity, because these are the things that really make who you are. So and it all flows out from that. The the craziness stems from I would say a religious ideology almost.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's anti-religion, so anti-religious that it becomes a religion in its own right, or quasi-religion.
Yes.
And as you say, it's about people wanting to be free to be themselves, which they find in themselves. And you have a situation where people are basically saying, I am what I say I am. I say what I choose. I am free to choose to decide everything about myself. I am what I am. Now, we know that there's only one supreme entity in the entire everything who can say, I am what I am. And yet there are some human beings claiming the power to say, I am what I am. So we are spoken into being by God, is the Christian belief. You know, in the beginning was the Word, and all things were created through the Word. God is constantly speaking us into being. And the new so-called progressive agenda is that people speak themselves into being. Yes. They speak themselves into whatever they want to be. And if any Christian is any doubt about whether following the sort of the queer theory, that sort of agenda, if you're in any doubt as to whether that is something a Christian can reasonably do, I just remind you of God's name that he identifies from the burning bush, and compare that to what human beings are trying to do. And I think there is an inconsistency there, let us say, as gently as we possibly can.
So, Bernard, you've been cleared by the teaching regulation agency, as you explained just a minute ago.
Yeah.
But you've now launched a new legal action, haven't you, against the school and the head teacher for malicious referrals?
That's right. And he also referred me to the Disclosure and Barring Service, which would see me barred from ever working with children, ever working in ministry in the church, if they put me on the children's barred list. And that is still outstanding. They took 6 months after the referral even to write to me to say we're thinking. That's
normally only if you've got a criminal record or something like that. They put you on.
Well, there needs to be demonstrable evidence that you either caused harm or there's a real risk that you would cause harm. And what they alleged was that because certain people were upset by the sermon, actually it comes down to one pupil who wrote an email saying, I think it's a she, but it's an anonymous pupil. She was upset. Because of that was emotional harm. And because I'd harmed, and because I was clearly willing to say the same thing again, which would be future harm, that was justification for saying that I was unsafe to work with children. The difficulty with that, and I pointed out in a fairly robust response, the difficulty with that, quite apart from interfering with freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and so on, is that the Disclosure and Barring Service has their own harm test. And you have to measure someone against the test to see whether they're going to cause harm. And emotional harm is defined in terms of causing severe and persistent, I'm just trying to remember the exact phrasing, severe and persistent adverse effects on a person's emotional development. So the idea that someone's sitting feeling a bit upset for 10 minutes in a sermon is going to suffer severe and persistent adverse effects is complete nonsense. I mean, that's just not how things work. So the school, in choosing to refer me, didn't look at the harm test and go, oh, well, there's nothing to see here. And the Disclosure and Barring Service didn't look at their own harm test in deciding to potentially take action against me. So I've pointed that out and many other problems with their reasoning. But they took 6 months to contact me in the first place. The chances are they'll take 6 months or more extra to make a decision. And so that's still hanging over me.
Come back, because you're now pursuing legal action against, this is new legal action against the school and head teacher for these referrals on the grounds that they are malicious, vindictive, victimizing. Explain it to us.
So I think it arises from the same discrimination of anti-Christian views. And one of the allegations that the head made in his referral letters, he talked about how it engaged in a deliberate media campaign of anti-LGBT and free speech agenda. And whilst
you anti-free speech when you were the one who got sacked for...
Well, it appears that he's accusing me of being anti-free speech, yeah, which is
when he sacked
slightly
you for
ironic.
expressing your Christian viewpoints, and he said you're the one who's anti-free speech, and he's the one who sacked you. Just honestly, there's so many absurdities in your case, Bernard.
It is crazy, isn't it? But the law on discrimination, there's that, but also in the Equality Act, there's this category of victimisation, which is basically to do with whistleblowing. So that if someone makes a complaint that they've been discriminated against, that their employer or whoever is not allowed to punish them for making a complaint. As long as it's a good faith complaint and you're not sort of making false allegations, you're not allowed to be punished, exposed to a detriment, as the law puts it, for making that complaint, for giving evidence in proceedings or whatever it might be. And because the new referrals, the TRA, DBS, follow the judgment of the tribunal, and basically the head has said, well, because the judgment found against Bernard, we must refer him. It's clearly because of the thing that I did, which was make a complaint and give evidence in a tribunal, and therefore that is victimisation. It's punishing me for being a whistleblower, effectively, and that is unlawful. So the new legal action is victimisation and still discrimination and harassment. And part of the reason for that is because it demonstrates an ongoing mindset of discrimination. So it's relevant when we're appealing the other case. But it's also because teachers are facing these kinds of referrals because they step outside the sort of the woke orthodoxy about what you're allowed to say on LGBTQIA plus matters. And I'd like to be able to establish some precedent to make it clear that teachers should not be mistreated in this way. It's not just me affected by this. I am sort of the canary in the coal mine because my case is so egregious, the way that things have panned out. But lots of other people are experiencing similar things, and it will only get worse if it's not stopped. So
yes,
that's the hope.
If I could just chip in, I mean, there was some research done by the Association of Christian Teachers on their teachers about RSE, and one of the questions they were asked is, is in your school gender identity, this idea that you could be a boy born in a girl's body or the opposite or vice versa, is that being taught as fact in your school? And 30% of the Christian teachers surveyed said gender identity, yes, it's being taught as fact inside my school. And you can imagine the kind of context for Christians in that environment. It's challenging for them. They're seeing this stuff coming. They're trying to decide how they should respond, and which is why we need to win. We need anyone that's watched this. We need your support, folks, because we need to win cases like this.
Let me just pause you a minute, because you've got Estelle Woodcock on Facebook asked this question: how can we support you? We have continued to pray. Also written to the Bishop of Derby asking why she's not supported you. No reply received. How can we support Bernard? Steve or Bernard? Steve, go on.
Well, write to your MPs about this stuff that you're seeing. We've got some good MPs who are highlighting some of the terrible stuff that's happening in terms of relationship, sex education in schools. There'll be some new guidance coming out in the next couple of weeks. Get involved in consulting about that guidance when it comes out.
Transgenderism in schools, that is, isn't it?
Transgenderism in schools, and there's been an RSHE, a panel that's looked at RSHE as well. That there should be some further advice about RSHE, and we must keep saying you shouldn't allow these kind of educate and celebrate type organisations to be doing the kind of training that they're doing. It's political activism. It is harmful for children. The way in which gender identity is being promulgated as the proper understanding of who we are as people, and it should be able to be pushed back against. It should be able to be disagreed with in very mild ways that Bernard has been able to do. So,
and I can see another question here, Steve, that looks set for you. Somebody called Unique 00 Heaven God Hears and Sees. I wonder if anyone has looked into setting up the school themselves. How difficult would it be, and what rules do they need to adhere to, Steve?
We're supporting about 25 different groups up and down the country who are starting their own new independent Christian education institutions of a variety of sorts. And there are people who are deciding to home educate their children and working together in home education hubs up and down the country. There are Christians doing their best inside the systems that we have, inside the state school system, inside the independent school system, but many are deciding to do exactly what unique heaven God hears and sees is suggesting there. And we at Christian Concern
I think he
fully
or she has
involved.
got a follow-on question: would there still be the expectation of them teaching LGBT issues?
Well, there are inspectorates of schools. So there's Ofsted, as many people know about them. There's also Independent Schools Inspectorate. They are inspecting to see whether or not children their well-being is being properly looked after. But it's very possible for schools to be able to get through their inspection, have thorough Christian biblical teaching going on in that school, and for them to be passed. I have to say there are challenges with all of that, because this wokery is creeping into all sorts of different aspects of the education system, even the teaching regulation authorities we were saying there. So there are reasons why we have an education department here at Christian Concern, so we can also be pushing back to challenge where this kind of progressive view is even shaping things to do with inspection. But so far, we've still been able to function many excellent Christian schools up and down the country. The Christian Schools Trust has got a great network of schools. Christian Education Europe has got a great network of schools and support. And there are many other Christians doing some great work in this space. So there is hope, and there are other possibilities. If you're a parent or you're a teacher thinking, is there something else I can be involved in that can be a bright, shining light of something different from the kind of approach that we're seeing frequently in state schools, and also sometimes in the independent sector, which is where Bernard's story comes from.
Bernard, what would your advice be to Christian teachers or parents, even in the state or private schools, and facing these kind of pressures around LGBT ideology, teaching LGBT ideology, and so on?
Well, first of all, pray, because that never goes amiss. Pray for wisdom and humility, because if a teacher or a parent of a child goes into senior leadership all angry and how dare you teach my child this or whatever, that's not going to be listened to. Whereas if you can go in with reasoned evidence and a clear understanding, then that's much more likely to get some progress. So make clear you understand what the law says. You understand that gender identity is not protected in law. That's a belief. And as I've said, people are allowed to hold that belief if they want, but it is a belief rather than anything that's demonstrable scientific fact, or as I say, it's not defined in law. It's not present in the law. So if you're able to go into a school and say, you appear to be teaching as fact something which is actually a belief, how is that going to be sorted out?
Because government guidance states that you can't teach transgenderism as fact, and you can't welcome an organisation that teaches that either.
Well, you can't teach anything which implies that children are born in the wrong body.
Yeah.
So the difficulty is that the activists distort what the law actually says for their own purposes, sometimes absolutely deliberately, sometimes perhaps out of ignorance. They don't, because it's heard so many times, well, gender identity is protected, they don't bother checking. But if you go in with clear facts and the clear statements of what is and isn't permitted, and say, can we look at the lesson plans? Can we look at the curriculum policy and compare it against what is actually permitted in a very reasonable, calm sort of way? It's going to be very difficult for head teachers to argue back against that. And actually, they're busy people. They've got a lot to do. There's every chance they haven't really thought about this very hard themselves. They just think they're doing what they need to do, and they've got other members of staff. A pastoral deputy head perhaps is the person who's been leading on this, and the head hasn't had time to go into the details. Go in with the details, with the facts, and you've got a much better chance of persuading them, yes, we need to change our approach.
And we've had quite a lot of success under the radar supporting parents and teachers to make that very kind of case that Bernard's saying there to their head teacher, and it has changed the culture in different sorts of schools. Sometimes it has taken court cases though as well to change the culture in certain situations in schools as well.
But quite often a simple email will cause the school to back down, and that's actually true. I've seen that happen in my own experience.
Or an email saying, a gentle email saying, I'd like to arrange a meeting to discuss this, please. The things like use of toilets and single-sex sports and whatever, those potentially a good area to look at. The law requires children over the age of 8 to have separate single-sex toilet facilities.
Yeah.
And it's a clear requirement in law.
Yeah.
And there are sadly many schools which are building toilet facilities which do not meet the law because they think they're wanting to be
inclusive
and so on.
Yeah.
But first of all, it's just not lawful is one approach. But the other is to say, if you are a young girl and you suddenly get your first period and you go to the toilets and there's a bunch of boys in there because it's mixed facilities, it's just individual cubicles, but otherwise they're mixed wash basins and whatever. How are you going to feel about that? What about that girl's dignity and privacy? And how is she going to struggle attending that school, knowing that she might go in there with that particular issue and there are boys there? And we know that pre-adolescent and early adolescent boys can be pretty horrible to something like that, sadly. Definitely. But that's just the way it is. And the rights of privacy and dignity are so important.
And if there's any parents who are thinking about raising these kinds of issues in their school, we've got a great resource that says how to raise your voice as a Christian parent, and hopefully that can be added into the resources that are made available to those that are on this call. How to raise your voice as a Christian parent, and we also have a resource that is for teachers that can help them in their own school to audit whether or not their own school is being suitably considerate of those with Christian beliefs, those with religious beliefs in this kind of area of RSE.
But so much of it you can do without even mentioning that you're Christian, because actually you're asking them to follow the law. You're asking them to be impartial, not to push a particular belief system in a secular school.
Yes.
Obviously, if it's an explicitly Christian school, you can say, but your Christian values are supposed to be X, Y, and Z. How are you employing those? But in non-Christian state schools, you can still say most of these things and change most of the things that worry us without actually needing to mention that you're Christian in particular.
Listen, I'm conscious that we've kind of run out of time. We've even gone over our usual lots of time for this discussion, but that's because it's been so interesting, I think, and so much engagement, lots of questions. Thank you for watching, engaging. I'm sorry I haven't got to all the questions there, but do watch this space, because I think we're expecting next week very likely guidance from the government on transgenderism in schools with a consultation, and we will definitely be responding to that, and we'll be guiding you about how to respond to that consultation as well, about that as well. So this is very much a live issue politically, as well as in terms of Bernard's own case. Bernard, thank you so much for joining us. Well done with your stance, and we wish you every success in your endeavours and with these legal cases as well. And we're grateful you've been cleared by all these agencies so far, apart from the Church of England, of course. Steve, thanks for your wisdom as well, and thanks for watching, and look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.